Hi everyone, and welcome to the next instalment of Clinker Chat. I'm really excited to be here today at Sydney Water in Parramatta, and one of the reasons that we're a little bit late in starting is that I did not realise how hard it was to park here, so it's taken us a moment longer to get ready than I hoped. I'm really excited to have two guests with me today from Sydney Water, Leigh Stass and Heri Bustamante. We're going to get into a really great conversation about how Sydney Water is really utilising their outputs of research to change the way that they manage our Sydney water infrastructure. But before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. This is a Zoom webinar, so you have two functions available to you as part of this webinar. The first one is the chat, and I can see that there are a couple of people who've put messages in there already. The chat function is visible to everyone in the webinar, so if you want to pop something in there, just be aware that everyone will see it. The other option is the Q&A, so if you pop a question into the Q&A, we very much intend to answer any questions that you have later on in the session, and those will come directly through to just us here in the Sydney Water headquarters. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land who are also part of the Darug Nation, but I'm going to have to read the name, the Barramudagal clan of the Darug Nation, and recognise elders past, present and emerging. And obviously today's flavour is all about water and sewerage management. So again, thinking about the ways that our First Nation people manage their own water assets to really work with the way that the land and the water was available to them, I think is something that's really always present in mind when we're having conversations about water infrastructure. So quick intro to SmartCrete CRC, which I know many of you are very aware of. SmartCrete is a cooperative research centre funded by the federal government to look at innovative new concrete products towards decarbonisation of the sector. Very excited to be talking today to Sydney Water about the way that we're working together to leverage the federal funding to create new impact in the Sydney Water environment. So thank you both so much for joining me today. So, Heri, I might start with you in terms of a little introduction, because we're doing some work together right now, SmartCrete and Sydney Water and Macquarie University. Maybe you could give us a bit of an overview on that project, what it looks like, what it's aiming to achieve.
Yes, I would have to give a bit of context before going into the project, because Sydney Water spends between $60 to $80 million per year in repairing and refurbishing concrete sewers. We have around 900 kilometers of concrete sewers and around 24,000 kilometers of sewers of other materials. But
wow.
The concrete sewers, which are the gravity sewers, they are the ones that are more exposed to corrosion by sulfuric acid. In the last 10 years, we have spent something between $3 to $4 million in research on how to develop a methodology to better manage sewers. And we know that the crucial factor is to minimize the evolution of hydrogen sulfide into the overhead of gravity sewers, because that's where the sulfuric acid, which is corroding, is destroying the concrete. So at the moment, we have had a lot of research before CRC, and now we have three very exciting projects with CRC, where we will be developing novel sensors to be able to detect, measure the corrosion rate of the sewers, such that we can predict the end of service life of the sewers, so we can intervene at the right time before it becomes a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what would a problem be? Because you mentioned the sulfuric acid corrodes the concrete.
Yes.
I mean, for someone who doesn't understand sewers, what does that mean when the concrete corrodes?
It starts destroying, corroding the concrete. You could see, it's not in the. It starts corroding the concrete, and there is always the possibility that the corrosion keeps going and attacks the reinforcement in the concrete. And that is bad news, because the repair of sewers that have corroded the rebar is extremely expensive. So we have to manage, we have to be able to predict at what stage or how much is the corrosion in the concrete.
Right. Okay, fascinating. And I suppose the real challenge, again, as someone who doesn't really understand how our sewer system operates, but I think one of the major challenges is that we can't see it on a daily basis. So largely this infrastructure is buried.
Yes.
So that question of how do we understand how it's corroding is really critical here, isn't it?
It's very important because normally you have to send crews into the sewers to examine them. And you also use CCTV, but essentially you have to, for large sewers, you have to put a crew that goes and examine and touches the wall to make sure that it's not corroding and measure pH on the concrete, all that type of things in a hazardous environment.
So how would a sensing system change that? How would that, remove that need?
If we have sensors, like photonic sensors that we embed in concrete coupons, and we can, the coupon start corroding faster than the infrastructure that we are trying to protect, the photonic sensor will tell us at what point the acid is percolating and reaching the sensor, and we are able to detect changes. And that's being done with one of the fast track projects we have with the CRC SmartCrete.
Right. Yeah, phenomenal. And then that information will help you to understand where you need to maintain those sewer systems. Yeah. So a sort of prescriptive model.
Yes. And also it alerts us to ensure that we are far away from the rebar, from the reinforcement.
Reinforcement, yeah.
So predictive maintenance.
Yes.
Yeah. Which saves us a lot of money down the
Yes.
long term, doesn't it, Heri?
Yeah.
Because a break is much more expensive than having to maintain something.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. So I know that in doing this project, we're collaborating with Macquarie University and the team at the Photonics Lab in Macquarie University, who are designing those concrete coupons and the photonic sensors that go within the coupons. I'm curious, so how does that collaborative relationship start? How do you identify, a research team that have the needs that you need?
We have started a project with the British University, City University of London. We contacted them because we knew they were doing work on photonic sensors. So they came over, they ran a small project, and it was so successful that the New South Wales Australian Water Association gave us an award for research innovation. From there, we had to stop, and we contacted Professor Whitford at Macquarie University, and we started an ARC linkage that further developed the photonic sensors, and it also developed other type of sensors to detect changes in the infrastructure. And from there on, we finalized that ARC linkage, and the outcome from that project helped to establish the CRC SmartCrete. And we have continued working with the Macquarie University with Professor Whitford since then. I'm talking here of 2017, I think.
Well, it seems like a really highly collaborative relationship, and it seems like you've really built a great relationship with that team, which I want to come to in a minute. But before we get there, just thinking about the success of that project, we're talking about the design of those concrete coupons. What happens once the project is done? What do you guys do then?
Oh, we would implement the coupons in the hot spot in the system to be able to see how fast the concrete is corroding, and we will be able to say how much life there is before the corrosion reaches the reinforcement, and we will be able to intervene and repair.
Fantastic. Great. Yeah, brilliant. So I suppose then coming back to the concept of what a cooperative research centre is all about, which is forging these collaborative relationships. In your experience, and I can see it's really extensive and you have great engagement across a number of research institutes, what would you say are some of the challenges to engaging across the industry research divide?
Sure. So I guess there's several challenges that both sides actually experience. The first one is really about that relationship building. You have to be able to trust a researcher and vice versa. They have to be, a researcher has to be able to trust the people that they work with internally within an organisation. And that sort of trust really takes time to be to build and to understand the different languages that we speak, the different needs that we have, particularly around different organisation expectations and then what they actually do. So for Sydney Water, we deliver world-class water services. We're over 100 years old and we're built not to fail, but we also need to keep at the cutting edge of research so we can face challenges and keep up with best practice of how we do things. And then when you come at it from from the academic side, it's around undertaking whether it's fundamental or applied research and science and research about someone's particular strength or capability and how those two marry together. Rather than just doing research, there is an expectation that what we fund and what we want to do can actually be applied into our business. Now, we have a very good understanding that sometimes research doesn't always work. You might not always get the result that you expect, but there is the way that we approach things is we're looking at a problem, we're trying to solve that problem, and how do we focus the research into trying to solve some of our challenges. Some of the other issues are probably around the appetite for risk.
Yes,
I think.
Yes.
So, research sometimes things don't work out and that's fine, but for us to be able to implement things or put things into the business, we have to know that it's going to work and that those predictive maintenance outputs that we use are going to help our business. So there are different appetites and different languages, but once you've got that level of trust that you have with people, it makes it easier to try and speed up what we're doing and how we approach the different types of research that we do.
Fantastic. And I think, what really resonates with me and what you just said there was that question of language, because I think in many cases we might have different ways of describing things like, success metrics or objectives. And so people might have different understandings of what we're actually collectively trying to achieve. Do you find, Leigh, particularly with your experience having worked directly in Macquarie University, you're a fabulous person to be heading up research and innovation here at Sydney Water with that experience and background. Do you find that really grounds you in the way that a research community might describe something as opposed to how an industry group would?
Look, I understand where people are coming from, both sides are coming from, which is very helpful because you'll have a researcher that has building their research capabilities and their strengths, and then we've got the organisation or the business way of looking at things of how do we make them match up. So I think it's an interesting. It is a very different way of looking at things and a different way of explaining things and embedding things, but I think there is commonalities. We all have a shared focus, we all have a shared view, and that's what the CRCs are for, is facing those challenges and working together to actually find those solutions, which is really exciting.
Absolutely. And that question of building trust, and maybe Heri, you could speak to this in the existing project. I know you've said, Leigh, it takes time, and of course any relationship takes time to develop that trust, but are there some key things that maybe helped you establish trust with the Macquarie team?
Yes, I think openness. We have to be absolutely clear on what the expectations are, but we also have to be absolutely clear on what the university requirements are. We know as an industry partner, we need to have something that we can use in our operations. But we also understand that university academics need to publish. And we keep the balance, because even though we are doing industrial research, we realize that the approach has to be universal, so to speak, such that anybody in the world could reproduce that. And the best way to do that is to ensure that the universities are publishing in top-level journals to make sure that it's all validated by peer review in peer review journals. Only thing is that the publication has to come a little bit after the application. We need to have the outcomes somehow implemented or used by our operations.
There's also a really important piece around you've got a scientific journal or that output. How do you translate that into something that I can take to the executive or I can take to the board to say, here are the results? Because often you might read a journal article and go, I don't understand what they're saying. And it's that translation piece and how it provides benefits to the organisation that is really important and sometimes lost a little bit. And I think there's some gains there when you've got the CRC of how do you translate that knowledge and that experience and that research so that we can pick it up within the industry and run with it and get things over the line and deploy things, deploy research into business as usual.
Yeah, absolutely.
That point Leigh mentioned in that translation of the highly academic language into plain English that everybody can understand is something that we have improved a lot in this collaboration with Macquarie University, and they realized the need to do it. So they are capable of producing several sort of bullet point, very well focused, easy to read, so we can translate to our senior managers here.
Yeah, fantastic. And so much of, building that expectation comes from the way that you communicate as a team, the way that you set those expectations. And I guess that's really a two-way relationship, isn't it? Because you're setting those expectations with them as well. And thinking about, the point you made before, Heri, about publishing, it seems like there's a real opportunity to get a lot of value out of published work, particularly if you're driving it. So I wonder if, setting those expectations around what is publishable versus what needs to be, redacted from anything, yes. That's also something, I guess, setting expectations up front.
Yeah, well, the expectations are already established in the umbrella agreement we have with CRC. And we go through all the information that is given, we assess it, whether it can be published or not, and we tell them, yes, this can be published, and they submit and publish. So we don't have any concerns other than commercially in confidence information. Everything else could be published. So we decide which can be published and which cannot be published. And so far we have been successful.
And I think the Macquarie University team are really understanding of that because they do work with industry so much. It's not just Sydney Water, but others. And so there is a real understanding of the needs of industry and of government. So they having been on that side and worked within that organisation, I do know that the deep understanding and the acknowledgement that they have in regards to that.
Yeah, fantastic. And then to mirror that in terms of Sydney Water and the work that you're doing here, one thing that I've been so impressed with in my very short career in the concrete and cement sector so far is the dedication of organisations like Sydney Water to research and innovation. It's very clear that it's really driving everything that you're doing as an organisation. So, Leigh, given that that's your area and you're carrying this responsibility, how do you really permeate this culture of research and innovation across Sydney Water?
It's one of our key strategy areas for Sydney Water, which is kind of what excited me about coming to this organisation. We actually presented to the board today about our innovation deployment plan, and what that sets out to do is to drive and empower the whole of organisation into a open innovation space and an innovative culture or innovation culture. And we do that through a number of different ways. Some of them are through our innovation research and deployment plan, which is available for everyone to read. So the plan aligns with our five-year strategy and has 4 key themes. And then what we do is we're trying to lift the capability of everyone, all staff across the organisation, of how they can improve the way that we do things, whether it's for our customers, whether it's through service delivery or asset maintenance or business development. And it's really about looking at where are the problems, rather than going, here's something shiny, someone's brought something to us, let's try and make it fit within the organisation. We're trying to look at ways of where are our major problems across the organisation. We know what they are. We've been dealing with them for a while. Set that problem and have a look, do a scan. And we work with a lot of universities. We've got some really strong partnerships, particularly with universities across Sydney, and work together and collaboratively to co-create research that will help solve that problem. There has to be it has to be desirable for the organisation, but also it has to be viable and provide an economic benefit for us as well. We also do things like lunch and learns. So that goes, I guess it's a power lunch where we bring in guests and we talk about lessons learned, how we do things, how might we approach research and innovation, and how we can move forward. So it's that capability lifting, and we have a pipeline. So it's a new, I think it's been in the organisation for a couple of years now. So if we're going to fail, we fail fast, but it feeds through. There are stage gates with the research that we do, and we have to build confidence, or the organisation has to have that confidence that if it's not working and it's not going to provide that benefit for us, then we have to stop where it is and let go. So there is some maturity around that within Sydney Water, but the organisation as a whole and the board as a whole and the executive as a whole really want us to drive research and innovation right across the organisation, which is really exciting actually, and an interesting time to join Sydney Water.
Yes. And fabulous to hear that you're not just thinking about asset management, because I think, anyone, I guess, looking into Sydney Water would imagine the pipes, would imagine the infrastructure, but the fact that you're talking there about, the customer engagement and the business development, and all of those angles, and how, as a business, you take an innovative approach. That's really amazing. Yeah,
our portfolio is spread right across that, and it really, we have a responsibility to the Greater Sydney about creating livable cities, particularly out in the west, as we develop new places. How are we going to do that, and what can Sydney Water do to provide healthy, clean, cooler cities, while also providing world-class water services.
Phenomenal. Well, I also find that this is one of the real values of operating within the university environment is, you could hire a fabulous engineer like Heri, for example, who's going to have a very clear focus on a particular technical aspect, or you could come into the university environment where you have this huge array of multidisciplinary, interesting researchers who can bring different lenses. So that idea of, how do you create a livable city? I can imagine there's a real infrastructure view on that, but then there's also the perhaps some of the business modelling, some of the human engagement pieces, and the value of coming into a university like Macquarie, for example, because we've been talking about them for most of the session, is that you can kind of pick and choose from different schools to pull together a highly multidisciplinary approach to a project.
Yeah,
it's really exciting.
Yeah, and that was my role that I did at Macquarie University, and that's what we aim to do here at Sydney Water. Is we know where those pockets of experience and expertise lies,
Yeah.
and they're the relationships that we want to build and strengthen and maintain over the long term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
phenomenal. So obviously net zero and sustainability is a really large challenge for Australia in general at the moment. How do you use innovation to really, push your own sustainability targets? Do you have metrics that you're tracking to? What are some of the sustainable issues that you're looking into?
I think we are developing those metrics, and we are very active on that because we are trying to reduce carbon emissions by the year 2030.
Fantastic.
So yeah, there is a very active program that we are developing at the moment.
Yeah, fantastic.
And then there'll be an expectation that our supply chain is net zero by 2040.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Very ambitious.
we are really moving
Yeah.
forward in that. So there are different ways, and being part of the SmartCrete CRC is just one of those pieces within that puzzle.
Yeah. And leadership from an organisation like Sydney Water is so important in that supply chain discussion because you really set the parameters for, things like, sustainable procurements and sustainable asset use as well. So, yeah, that's really phenomenal.
It's very exciting.
Yeah, brilliant. So, from what I understand, Sydney Water is the largest water network, certainly in Australia. I was hearing it compared to a large water network overseas. Am I barking up the wrong tree by saying it's one of the most significant water infrastructures in the world?
There might be other ones. I know the one there are a couple or a few in USA, but it's one of the largest in Australia.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
we have 5 million customers at the moment.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
and with the growing of the West and Western Sydney as it grows, we're hoping that we will retain the customers we have, but also gain the customers that are going to live out in Western Sydney. Yeah.
So we've talked about, maintenance and concrete corrosion as being a huge problem that we're working on through this innovative sensor project that we talked about earlier. What are some of the other challenges that you have in managing such an enormous infrastructure?
On managing infrastructure.
Or building, where do you see that there are opportunities for a research approach to perhaps, help in the management, the growth, what are some of the challenges that you've seen?
I think we are an end user of concrete, so it is embodied in the supply chain, and this is where we are trying to reduce. We have identified specific components where the concrete aspects play a big role, so we are trying to reduce that. But on the corrosion protection, we have to be very active because not many other utilities have the issues, and we have to drive the market to make sure that they continue developing materials that we can test and eventually use.
Yes.
So we sort of have to lead that part of the industry.
Right. And so when you're talking about expanding into the West, does that provide opportunity to have field trials for some of these new concrete mixes, or how do you? Yeah.
But even without expanding to the West, there is always the possibilities of testing new materials to protect the current infrastructure. We have several $1 billion buried, and we have to protect that.
Yes.
So some of my colleagues who are always identifying new products, they are always interested in finding out are there any new products that we can start testing in our infrastructure.
Yeah, fantastic.
So I would also add to that, Heri, that given that we want by 2040 that we want to make sure our supply chain is carbon zero, that those people who are providing those products for us and the infrastructure for us start manoeuvring into a space where whatever they're, if it's concrete or piping and things like that, they really think about how that's procured and how that's made, so they can meet with, fit within our targets as well. So there's a there's a good opportunity there for people.
Good opportunity to come
Chuck that
connect.
out there.
Yes. That's fantastic. So we will open up to questions in a moment, so please feel free to pop anything that you would like to ask Leigh or Heri into the Q&A section. Heri, you provided a couple of slides. Would you like me to share them?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yes.
I personally was blown away by the size and scale of our sewer system. I mean, again, as someone who doesn't know this sector very well, I'd imagined that we were talking little pipes that come out of toilets and go into a sewerage system, but that is enormous.
Yes. And I think I wanted to show it because this is the type of research we have to do in Sydney Water. You could never reproduce the conditions of the sewer into a laboratory. So all our research work, it has to be done in the field. And that requires different skills, even different ways of interpreting results. It's a living environment, and we cannot say, let's keep one variable constant and let's change the rest. No, that's what it is.
Yes.
So, and we have to be able to draw firm conclusions based on what we measure there.
And so this image here is the hanging of the concrete coupons that you mentioned?
No, this was a previous project we did with ARC. It was a very large project, 5-year ARC linkage project with something like 5 universities or something like 10 or 12 utilities. And we were exposing concrete coupons for something different in the sewer. So we were able to, after a certain period of time, we will go retrieve the coupon and make some few measurements to them to be able to measure how the concrete had been deteriorated.
Right, so it was a manual process as opposed to what we're talking about now with the sensor embedded in the coupon. Oh, phenomenal.
This is where we will be working with the project with Macquarie. We will be installing the smart coupons in chambers that have very high concentration of H2S and also high humidity. So they are the ideal conditions to be able to measure corrosion, because those are the conditions that favor the formation of sulfuric acid. So we will be doing that. The point I'm trying to make is this is in the field. This is very, very valuable, and we are also happy to get manufacturers of other materials like geopolymers or other materials that we could test there to be able to see how resistant these materials are in highly corrosive conditions.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And that's we were installing in the ARC linkage we had with Macquarie University. We were installing some of the humidity sensors in some manholes in a sewer location near Northgate wastewater treatment plant. So the point being, we are all working in the field under highly variable conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely something that keeps coming up in conversation at SmartCrete as well. This idea that we can't just create LabCrete.
Yes.
We need to test it in, and you know, this so beautifully demonstrates what a dynamic environment you're working within, an enormous dynamic environment where I can imagine that, you know, given the microbial communities that are moving through the systems that you're managing, you're going to have very different stress points in different parts of your network, aren't you? Yeah.
And then this has been one of the success points we have reached with the Macquarie University in the fast track projects and in the ARC linkage project we have with them. We have been able to deploy these sensors under real conditions, so we can draw conclusions that are totally valid.
Phenomenal. Well, thank you both so much. That was absolutely fascinating, and I am incredibly impressed with the way that your organisation is so focused on research, on collaboration, and then finding those impact pathways for research outcomes. It's just such a fabulous case study that I hope that many other organisations can learn from. We do have 5 minutes remaining if anyone had any questions. Otherwise, I'll just keep asking questions about sewer systems because it's fabulous. Hi, Hongja, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Hongja from UTS, nice to meet you, thank you. Regarding concrete sewer predictive maintenance, what is your vision on addressing this challenge in 5, 10, 20 years? What are the key factors to ensuring success? Great question, thank you, Hongja.
What we would like is to be able to have a highly reliable model that allow us to predict what's happening in the sewers without man entry. No one will have to go inside because it's a hazardous environment, and we would like to be able to get it with those sensors off the site.
So a completely autonomous
Yes.
sensing system, which is then, predicting where you might
Yes.
have fault points and
Yes.
when you need to maintain.
And needing no man entry, that's a crucial component.
Yes, yeah. I think
Yeah.
probably your workers would be quite
Yeah.
happy not to go there as well. So.
No, I think we're aligned on that, Heri, and it's around, having a system internally that we can respond to something well before it breaks, and that we can maintain things so we're not having to have that extra expense of having to deal with either environmental issues or break issues and having to shut down water or what do we call them? Biosolids. We don't call it sewage, but biosolids. And communities, our customers aren't impacted from that.
Well, that makes so much sense. Actually, that's a layer that I hadn't even thought about. It's a critical infrastructure that you're providing here. So any of those, faults might actually shut off critical access to water and sewage facilities. Yeah.
We must avoid sewer collapses at all costs.
Yes.
And you can go anywhere in the city or anywhere in Sydney, and you will notice that there is an underground infrastructure that is doing all the work.
Yeah. What a fantastic lens to bring to that, because I was thinking more from the perspective of, well, we want to maintain because that's going to lower our carbon emissions. It's going to allow more sustainable and longevity of the system itself. But actually, what another incredible lens to bring to that. That it would really mess up our sector if we couldn't.
Yes, we have to make sure that public health is always protected at all stages.
Yeah, fantastic. Mohammed, thank you for your question. You're right, I did not get you to the pointy end of when can we expect to see some results from the project that we've been talking about, the coupon project?
I would say within, I'm not sure if Michael is in the audience, but ideally within 2 or 3 years, I think we should be able to get we will be installing the coupon soon, and we have a concrete samples that will corrode faster than the infrastructure, so we will be able to extrapolate there. So I think 2 to 3 years we should be able to get some initial answers that will give us a good indication of what's happening.
Yeah, fantastic. And I guess that the other side of it, which is, testing the design of the coupons, testing the design of the sensors, you've probably already got some really good insight in terms of how appropriate the design of the sensors are.
I think the design are excellent. And it's just ensuring that they can survive in such a harsh environment. But the principles of the sensors are now well established, and they have been tested under ideal conditions, but it's still good.
Yeah, fantastic. Peter Sleep, thank you for your question. What design life in years do you require for new structures?
Oh, that's a tricky one. 100 years.
100 years.
Generally,
As
in new infrastructure.
New structures.
I think it's the same with most infrastructure or development. It's 100 years.
100 years. Yeah. Which is phenomenal when you think about the fact that a lot of our existing infrastructure is probably that old.
Yes.
Some of it is.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Michael, hi. Thanks for joining us. We have been talking about you a lot in this presentation. Prioritise fieldwork over publication. Well, you do love to hear that from a researcher, don't you? Thank you, Mick. Any
Agreed.
comments on? Yeah,
Agreed, totally.
Yeah.
And Mick, we should have had you in the room with us to share some discussions around how that research is going. Well, we're pretty much bang on time in terms of the time that we had set aside for this webinar. So yeah, if I could thank you both again so much for this really fantastic deep dive into the work that you're doing at Sydney Water. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all so much for joining us today. As always, we do make these recordings available afterwards. So if you want to come back and again dive into the world of Sydney Water, we will make that available through our website. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our Clinker Chat next month.